In 1962, a man named Earl Pruitt in Dayton, Ohio, drove a rusted Ford pickup down the same 6 blocks every Thursday morning. He was not delivering anything. He was collecting old washing machines, broken radiators, a busted swing set somebody dragged to the curb. By Friday afternoon, Earl had dropped everything at the scrapyard and pocketed enough cash to cover his family's grocery bill for 2 weeks. No boss, no invoice, no business license, just a truck, a strong back, and the knowledge that one man's junk was always going to be another man's raw material. Here is the question this video is going to answer. What if the most reliable side income strategies were not invented last year, but buried 60 years ago, and they are still sitting there waiting for someone like you to pick them back up? Before the 9-to-5 became the only story anyone told about work in America, there was a whole parallel economy running underneath it. Call it the informal economy, the neighborhood economy, the cash-in-hand economy. It was built by people who did not wait for a job posting. They looked at what their neighbors needed, figured out what they could provide, and charged a fair price for it. This was not desperation. This was resourcefulness operating at a very high level. And the reason most of these hustles disappeared from the conversation is not because they stopped working. It is because the internet made certain kinds of work feel more legitimate than others. Let us start with Earl's hustle, because scrap metal and junk hauling is probably the most underestimated income stream on this entire list. The pattern goes back to the late 1800s, when rag-and-bone men walked US and UK city streets collecting metal, rags, and bones door to door, reselling everything to mills and dealers. By World War II, scrap collection had become so embedded in American life that neighborhood kids were earning small sums gathering metal for local drives. The hustle survived because the math never changed. You get paid once by the homeowner to haul the junk away, and you get paid a second time by the scrapyard for the material itself. 2 payments for one job. Here is what makes this hustle still genuinely viable in 2026. Copper and brass scrap prices per pound are dramatically higher than mixed steel, and a single appliance haul can contain both. Old refrigerators have copper coils. Old plumbing jobs leave behind brass fittings. Scrapyards post their daily prices locally, so you can check what the market is paying before you even load the truck. The modern version of this hustle looks almost identical to what Earl Pruitt was doing in Dayton in 1962. You run a local Craigslist ad offering free or low-cost junk removal. Homeowners pay you to take the problem away. The scrapyard pays you for the material. Your truck is your overhead and your profit engine at the same time. Hustle number 2 is one that most people dismiss as small change, and that is exactly why it keeps working. Bottle and can redemption routes. In states with deposit laws, every returnable container is worth a fixed amount of cash, and the people who figured this out decades ago were not doing it casually. They were running routes. A woman in Michigan in the early 1980s, after the state passed its 10-cent deposit law in 1976, one of the highest in the country at the time, was reportedly collecting from 3 apartment complexes, a bowling alley, and 2 office buildings on a weekly schedule. She was not scavenging. She had agreements. She had a system. That is the difference between pocket change and a real income stream. The key insight here is the route model, not the individual can. Nobody got rich picking up 1 bottle at a time. But the people who built agreements with apartment managers, office building supers, and event venues created a recurring, predictable cash flow that required almost no startup cost. This one got buried, but it never stopped working. Today, 10 U.S. states still have active bottle deposit laws, and the arbitrage opportunity is the same as it was in 1983. The modern version adds 1 layer. Some people negotiate with event organizers to be the exclusive post-event collector, which can mean hundreds of dollars in a single afternoon from a community fair or a Little League tournament. Hustle number 3 is one that has a romantic history and a surprisingly strong present. Mobile knife sharpening and tool repair. For most of the 20th century, the sharpener was a neighborhood fixture. He drove a truck or pushed a cart, rang a bell, and housewives and restaurant cooks brought out their knives. In cities like Chicago and Philadelphia through the 1950s and 1960s, a skilled sharpener with a good route could service 20 to 30 customers in a single afternoon. The equipment was simple, a bench grinder or a whetstone wheel mounted to a vehicle. The skill was learnable in a few weeks. And the demand never went away because knives never stopped getting dull. They did not have apps. They had resourcefulness. And the modern version of this hustle is actually better positioned than the original because the customer base has expanded. Restaurant kitchens, butcher shops, and catering companies all need sharp tools on a regular schedule, and they will pay a professional rate for it, not a favor rate. A basic belt sharpening setup costs under $200. The skill itself can be learned from free instructional content and a few weeks of practice. The business model is the same one the cart guy used in 1955. Build a route, show up on schedule, charge a fair price, and let word of mouth do the advertising. Old hustle, new money. Hustle number 4 is one that almost nobody talks about anymore, and that silence is a real opportunity. Neighborhood laundry and ironing service. Before laundromats became common in the late 1950s, taking in wash was a legitimate household income strategy for millions of American women, particularly in working-class and immigrant communities. A woman in a South Side Chicago neighborhood in the 1940s might take in laundry for 6 to 8 households, charging per item or per bundle, and earn the equivalent of a part-time wage without leaving her block. The work was hard, but the overhead was nearly zero because she already owned the equipment. The modern version of this hustle has one significant upgrade: the wash and fold drop-off service. Busy dual-income households in 2026 are paying premium rates for someone to pick up their laundry, wash it, fold it, and return it. No app required. No platform fee. You advertise on a neighborhood Facebook group or a paper flyer at the laundromat. You use your own washer and dryer, and you charge by the pound or by the bag. The same logic that made this work in 1944 makes it work now. People have always been willing to pay to get back their time, and laundry has always been the chore they hate most. Hustle number 5 is one your grandparents almost certainly understood, and that the current housing market has quietly made more relevant than it has been in decades. Taking in boarders. Through most of American history, renting out a spare room or a finished basement to a working boarder was simply what you did if you had the space and needed the income. In the 1930s, the practice was so widespread that census data from the period shows a significant percentage of urban households had at least one non-family member living under the roof. It was not a sign of poverty. It was a sign of financial intelligence. Your grandparents already solved this problem. We just stopped listening. The practical mechanics of this hustle in 2026 are straightforward. A spare bedroom, a finished basement, or an above-garage apartment rented to a working adult, a traveling nurse, a construction crew member on a long job, or a college student can generate several $100s a month in cash income without any platform involvement, if you prefer it that way. The tax and legal landscape varies by city, so checking local ordinances matters. But the core of the hustle is identical to what it was in 1935. You have space. Someone needs space. You agree on a price. The transaction is as old as the concept of shelter itself. Hustle number 6 is the one that attracts the most skeptics and produces the most converts once they actually try it. Used book and media scouting. The basic move is this. You go to garage sales, estate sales, and thrift stores. You find books and media that are priced at 50 cents or $1, and you sell them to used bookstores or through resale channels for multiples of what you paid. This is not a new idea. Book scouts, people who made their living finding undervalued books and flipping them to dealers and collectors, were a recognized profession in American cities from at least the 1920s onward. They worked the estate sales, the church rummage sales, the library discard piles. The modern version of this hustle is still built on the same core skill, knowing what something is worth before the person selling it does. You do not need to be a rare book expert to make this work. You need to learn a few reliable categories, show up consistently at sales, and move your inventory through used bookstores, local resale shops, or any of the major secondhand platforms. Side hustle researchers consistently rank reselling secondhand goods as one of the most common and profitable offline side hustles in 2026. The people doing it well are not doing anything complicated. They are doing what the book scouts did in 1938. They are paying attention. Hustle number 7 is the one that has been hiding in plain sight every weekend for the last 70 years. Flea market and swap meet trading. The modern flea market has direct roots in the post-war American swap meet, which itself descended from European flea markets that date back centuries. By the 1960s and 1970s, weekend swap meets in California, Texas, and the Midwest were drawing thousands of buyers and sellers every Saturday morning. A vendor with a good eye for underpriced goods, a folding table, and a cash box could turn a $50 inventory investment into $200 in a single weekend. That math has not changed. The flea market hustle works because it is pure old-school arbitrage. You buy low at garage sales and estate sales during the week, and you sell at a markup from your table on the weekend. The categories that have always moved well at swap meets are tools, vintage kitchenware, working electronics, and small useful items that people want to handle before they buy. Table rental fees vary by market, typically in the range of $15 to $40 for a weekend spot. The barrier to entry is low, the feedback is immediate, and the education you get from a single weekend of selling is worth more than any course on resale strategy. If it worked during the Depression, it is worth a second look. Here is what connects all 7 of these hustles, and why they outlasted every economic shift of the last 100 years. None of them required a credential. None of them required a platform. Every single one of them was built on a simple trade: your time, your attention, and your willingness to do something most people would rather pay someone else to handle. The people who ran these hustles in the 1930s, the 1950s, the 1970s were not waiting for the economy to get better or for someone to hand them an opportunity. They looked at what was available, figured out what was needed, and closed the gap. That is not a historical curiosity. That is a repeatable strategy. So here is where I want to leave you. Pick one, not all 7. 1. Look at this list and ask yourself which one fits what you already have: a truck, a spare room, a Saturday morning, a strong back, a good eye for value. The people who made these hustles work were not special. They were consistent. They showed up. They built a small reputation in a small area and let that reputation do the selling for them. That is still how it works. That is still how it has always worked. If any of these 7 sparked something for you, drop it in the comments. I read every one of them, and I want to know which hustle you are actually going to test this month. I will see you in the next one.